John Wayne is a Hollywood legend who's known for his iconic big screen performances. He also had a very big life when he wasn't working.
John Voight in Midnight Cowboy, Richard Burton in Anne of the Thousand Days, and John Wayne in True Grit.
Imagine a time when cowboys ruled the silver screen. The heartbeat of Hollywood was the smell of gunpowder, the clink of spurs, and the sound of saloon doors swinging open. But behind the tough guy image, the real-life stories of these Western legends were anything but picture-perfect. Some skyrocketed to fame only to crash and burn spectacularly. Others faded away, forgotten by the industry they helped build. This is the untold story of Western stars Hollywood forgot, their meteoric rise and tragic fall. The Western genre wasn't just widespread, it was an obsession. From the 1920s through the 1960s, cowboy movies dominated Hollywood. Men like John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, and Gary Cooper became immortal icons. But dozens shone bright and burned out fast for every legend who stood the test of time. Some fell to scandal. Some were swallowed by addiction. A changing industry simply abandoned others with no more use. Take Tom Mix, for example. In the silent film era, he wasn't just a cowboy, he was the cowboy. Dressed in flashy outfits, riding his trusty steed Tony, and performing his own jaw-dropping stunts, Mix was the most prominent Western star of his time. He was Hollywood's first real action hero, who could leap from a moving train onto a horse without breaking a sweat. But Hollywood evolved, and his larger-than-life persona suddenly felt outdated when sound films took over. He tried a comeback, but the industry had moved on by then. His story ended in 1940 when he crashed his car in the Arizona desert, a suitcase full of money beside him, a tragic symbol of a once great career reduced to dust. Then there was Ken Maynard. He had it all, the looks, the skills, the charisma. He was one of the first singing cowboys, and for a time, he was among the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. He was a master horseman, performing stunts with breathtaking precision. But Maynard had a temper that burned bridges faster than he could build them. Directors, producers, and even co-stars found him impossible to work with. His career crumbled, and he spent his later years broke and living in a trailer, a forgotten relic of a bygone era, spending his last days bitter and alone. One of the earliest casualties of Hollywood's brutal cycle was Buck Jones. He was a silent and early sound era star, known for his rugged charm and effortless writing skills. But as the industry moved towards modern storytelling, his brand of cowboy heroism felt outdated. He was tragically killed in the infamous 1942 Coconut Grove fire in Boston. In a twisted fate, the man who once dodged bullets on screen couldn't escape the flames in real life. The 1950s saw a seismic shift in entertainment. The golden age of Western cinema, which had once dominated theaters and captivated audiences, was slowly fading. In its place, television was rising, bringing a new kind of Western right into people's living rooms. At first, it seemed like a blessing, more opportunities for actors, more stories to tell. But for many Western stars, it was the beginning of the end. Suddenly, the same actors who had ruled the silver screen struggled to stay relevant. Cheaply produced, serialized TV shows replaced big-budget Western films that had once drawn massive crowds. Studios no longer needed movie stars. They needed actors who could deliver week after week on a tighter budget and a smaller screen. Names like Hopalong Cassidy and Gene Autry managed to make the transition, reinventing themselves as television icons. Once a top-grossing singing cowboy, Autry shifted into TV production and maintained his legacy. Hopalong Cassidy, played by William Boyd, became a merchandising phenomenon, his image plastered on lunchboxes, comic books, and toy six-shooters. But not everyone was so lucky. Television wasn't a new opportunity for many, it was a death sentence. One of the biggest casualties of this shift was Alan Rocky Lane. During the 1940s, Lane had been one of the most recognizable Western stars. He had the look, chiseled jaw, piercing eyes, and the presence to match. His deep, commanding voice made him stand out among the sea of cowboy actors, and he became a staple of the genre, starring in dozens of action-packed films where he played the ultimate good guy, tough, righteous, and always ready to fight for justice. But when television took over, Lane found himself cast aside. The studios that once courted him were no longer interested in traditional Western film stars. The roles dried up, and so did the opportunities. He desperately tried to stay in the industry, but Hollywood had moved on. Then came one last gig, the voice of the famous talking horse, Mr. Editor, yes, that Mr. Editor. It was a bittersweet final act. Though the show became a beloved classic, Lane received no recognition for his role, no credits, no accolades. His rich, iconic voice entertained millions, but hardly anyone knew it was him behind the microphone. When Lane passed away in 1973, his death barely made a ripple in Hollywood. The man who had once been a leading cowboy star was now just another forgotten figure, his contributions overshadowed by more prominent names and changing times. If Alan Lane's career faded gradually, Sunset Carson's fell apart in the blink of an eye. Carson had all the makings of a Hollywood great. He was tall, rugged, and had an undeniable screen presence. Republic Pictures had big plans for him. He was poised to be their next Western superstar, following in the footsteps of Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. For a while, everything went according to plan. Carson became a fan favorite for his cowboy charm and thrilling action sequences. His films, including Bandits of the Badlands and Bells of Rosarita, were successful, and his future looked bright. But Hollywood is an unforgiving place, and one mistake can cost everything. Carson's downfall came not from a string of bad films, but from a personal misstep. He showed up drunk to an essential meeting with Republic Pictures executives. In an era where studios tightly controlled the images of their stars, this was unacceptable. Republic didn't give second chances. They dropped him immediately. Just like that, his career was over. After being blacklisted by Republic, Carson tried to keep going, but without the backing of a major studio, the opportunities were few and far between. He took whatever jobs he could, small rodeo shows, personal appearances, anything to stay in the spotlight. But it wasn't enough. By the time the Western craze had faded, Sunset Carson was a relic of the past, another fallen cowboy whose dreams had crumbled under the weight of a single mistake. Another name that once held weight in the Western genre was Whip Wilson. While he never reached the legendary status of John Wayne or Gary Cooper, his unique talent set him apart, his mastery of the bullwhip. Wilson wasn't just an actor, he was a performer, incorporating breathtaking whip tricks into his films that dazzled audiences and kept them returning for more. He starred in dozens of B-westerns, playing the rugged cowboy hero, often paired with his horse, Silver Bullet. He had a dedicated fan base at the height of his career, drawn to his quick-draw skills and action-packed showdowns. But the problem with B-westerns was that they were expendable. They were cheap and churned out quickly, and when the Western boom ended, there was no place for them or their stars. When Hollywood's love affair with Westerns began to wane, so did Wilson's career. Unlike major stars who had the chance to pivot into new roles, B-movie actors were hit the hardest. The industry had moved on, and Wilson was left without a place. Wilson faded into obscurity with no major television deals and no interest from studios. While he continued to work sporadically, his glory days were long gone. When he died, his name barely registered in Hollywood's memory. Western fans had once adored him, but by the end of his life, he was just another forgotten cowboy, lost in the vast history of Hollywood's ever-changing landscape. Television didn't just change how Westerns were produced, it changed the Western hero archetype. The clean-cut, morally righteous cowboys of the early Hollywood days were being replaced with something darker and grittier. Anti-heroes began to take center stage, and actors who had built their careers playing traditional cowboys found themselves out of place. The rise of revisionist Westerns in the late 1960s and 1970s meant that the old-fashioned cowboy characters seemed outdated. Films like The Wild Bunch and Once Upon a Time in the West depicted a different kind of Western world. Violent, lawless, and morally complex. These new films weren't about the noble cowboy saving the day. They were about outlaws, flawed men, and a dying way of life. There was no room left for actors like Lane, Carson, and Wilson in Hollywood's new version of the West. The roles they had once played, the brave sheriff, the singing cowboy, the whip-wielding hero, belonged to another era. And as the industry moved forward, these men, once beloved and once famous, became distant echoes of a long-lived time. For some, the fall from grace wasn't just about losing roles, but about losing themselves. Fuzzy Knight was a beloved sidekick in countless westerns, but when the roles dried up, he faded into obscurity, spending his last days in poverty. Then there was Bob Steele. A star in the 1930s, he was a staple of B-westerns. But by the time Hollywood moved on, so did his fame. He took on minor, forgettable roles just to survive. His legacy? It's a name that only die-hard Western fans remember. And let's not forget Rex Allen. He was one of the last great singing cowboys. When Hollywood turned its back on the genre, he transitioned into voice work, narrating Disney films and commercials. But his story took a tragic turn when, in 1999, he was accidentally run over by his caretaker's car in his own driveway. Ray Crash Corrigan, a stuntman turned actor, starred in countless B-westerns but was replaced by younger faces as the industry evolved. He turned to running a tourist attraction, Corriganville, a movie ranch that hosted countless film productions. But even that venture couldn't save him from obscurity. Hollywood loves the cowboy myth, the fearless gunslinger, the rugged outlaw, the hero riding into the sunset. But the real-life cowboys of the silver screen rarely got a happy ending. Take Johnny Mac Brown. He went from college football star to Western film hero, starring in over 160 films. But when the Western craze died down, so did his career. He spent his last years making public appearances at rodeos, selling autographed pictures to fans who barely remembered him. And then there's Tim Holt. He starred in some of the greatest Westerns, including The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. But after Hollywood left him behind, he returned home to run a radio station. The man who once rode alongside legends died in near anonymity. By the 1970s, the Western genre was all but dead. Big-budget productions like The Wild Bunch and Unforgiven redefined the cowboy, replacing clean-cut heroes with gritty, morally gray characters. The old-school Western stars? Most were long forgotten. Some, like Rory Calhoun, tried to reinvent themselves, taking on roles in B-movies and television. Others, like Lash LaRue, drifted into obscurity, making a living from fan conventions. And then there were those like Monty Hale, who quietly stepped away from Hollywood, never looking back. Today, when people talk about Westerns, a few big names come to mind. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Gary Cooper, James Stewart, the legends whose names have stood the test of time. They are celebrated, their films remastered, their legacies cemented in Hollywood history. But behind them, in the shadows of cinematic greatness, were the forgotten pioneers, the actors who risked everything for the Western genre, only to be cast aside when the industry no longer used them. These men defined the cowboy archetype, lived and breathed the rugged lifestyle on screen, and performed dangerous stunts long before Hollywood had the safety measures it does today. Some were former rodeo stars, real-life cowboys who found themselves in front of a camera simply because they could ride a horse and handle a gun better than anyone else. Others were trained actors who dedicated their lives to the art of storytelling through Westerns, only to see their careers evaporate the moment Hollywood changed its mind. Hollywood has a way of forgetting the very people who helped build it. As trends shift, as audiences demand something new, actors who were once household names become yesterday's news. For the Western stars who weren't lucky enough to transition into new genres or television, the fall from grace was swift and merciless. Some ended up broke, some faded into obscurity, and others, tragically, never recovered from the industry's cold indifference. Their stories serve as a stark reminder of how fleeting fame can be. Hollywood moves fast, and those who can't keep up are left behind, buried under the dust of an era long gone. But if you listen closely and pay attention to the history hidden between the frames of old, grainy Western films, you can still hear it. The echo of their spurs, the distant gunfire of forgotten duels, and the whispers of Western stars Hollywood left in the dust. It's not just the forgotten actors. Many of their films have also disappeared into the void of history. Unlike today, where digital preservation allows movies to be stored forever, early Hollywood wasn't so lucky. Many Western films from the silent era and early talkies are now entirely lost, either deteriorated beyond repair or destroyed by studios that saw no value in keeping them. During the early 20th century, film preservation wasn't a priority. The original film reels were made of nitrate, a material known for being incredibly flammable and prone to decomposition. Many silent westerns, which defined the genre's foundation, were stored carelessly and eventually crumbled to dust. Others were outright discarded or repurposed, melted down for their silver content, or thrown away when studios needed storage space. One actor who suffered greatly from this tragic loss of film history was Tom Tyler. A prominent Western star of the 1920s and 1930s, Tyler was one of the most prolific actors of his time, starring in nearly 180 films. But today, many of those films no longer exist. Some were lost in fires, others simply decayed over time, and his legacy remains incomplete. Imagine dedicating your entire life to a craft, only to have your work vanish as if it never existed. That fate befell countless Western stars. Their careers erased, their performances forgotten, and their contributions to Hollywood's history rendered invisible. Even well-known Western actors have had significant parts of their filmography disappear. Hoot Gibson, another silent-era cowboy legend, had dozens of films now considered lost. Buck Jones, a beloved Western hero, saw many of his early works vanish. Even William S. Hart, one of the genre's most influential figures, has films that are gone forever. For the few lost Westerns that are rediscovered, it's often a race against time. Sometimes forgotten reels surface in old storage facilities, or collectors come across rare prints that have survived decades of neglect. But it's already too late for many of these films. Their stories have been swallowed by history, leaving behind only faint memories and a few fading photographs. Hollywood is quick to celebrate its most significant icons, but rarely mourns the work it has lost. For every John Wayne classic restored in high definition, hundreds of forgotten Westerns will never be seen again. With so many stars and films lost to time, does the Western genre still have a future? Over the past few decades, Westerns have struggled to maintain their relevance. The golden era of cowboys and outlaws is long gone, and the days when Westerns dominated the box office are a distant memory. But now and then, Hollywood tries to bring the West back. In recent years, films like The Revenant, 2015, True Grit, 2010, Django Unchained, 2012, and The Hateful Eight, 2015, have proven that audiences still crave the grit and intensity of the Old West. These films, however, are very different from the classic Westerns of the past. Instead of clean-cut heroes and black-and-white morality, today's Westerns are gritty, violent, and morally complex. One of the biggest success stories in modern Western storytelling is the TV series Yellowstone, which has become a cultural phenomenon. Starring Kevin Costner, the show brings Western themes into the present, mixing classic cowboy tropes with modern conflicts. Its success has sparked spin-offs like 1883 and 1923, proving that the Western genre isn't dead. It's just evolving. But even as Westerns make small comebacks, many of the genre's pioneers remain forgotten. Hollywood loves to honor John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, but what about the stars who paved the way for them? What about the men who rode the horses, fired the guns, and shaped the cowboy image long before the legends we know today? Unfortunately, the Western revival doesn't always mean recognition of the past. While new Westerns continue to be made, they rarely acknowledge the actors and filmmakers who built the genre from the ground up. Their names aren't mentioned in retrospectives, their films aren't restored, and their stories are largely ignored. Hollywood owes a debt to the forgotten Western stars. Without them, the genre wouldn't exist. Without them, we wouldn't have the cowboy mythos that shaped American pop culture. But the sad truth is that fame is fleeting. New icons have replaced the Western stars who once ruled the box office, and the industry has moved on. Their films collect dust in archives, if they still exist, and their names fade further into obscurity each year. Still, their contributions deserve to be remembered. They were the trailblazers who brought the Wild West to life, risked life and limb performing their stunts, and sacrificed everything for a Hollywood that ultimately left them behind. So the next time you watch a Western, Think about the actors you don't recognize, the men who starred in B-westerns, whose films are nearly impossible to find. They may not have become legends like Wayne or Eastwood, but they were the genre's foundation. And if you listen closely, perhaps you'll still hear them. The echo of their spurs, the distant gunfire of forgotten battles, and the whispers of Western stars. Hollywood left in the dust. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. And remember, legends never truly die, but sometimes they get buried under the sands of time.